So today we're going to talk about Killjoy because a couple days ago, Valor Leaks tweeted out that a Killjoy balance is in the works. Now this was on March 16th, so this was not referring to the old Killjoy balance where the ult got nerfed to 8 cost and the turret lost some HP as well. No, this was referring to potentially new Killjoy balance updates coming and perhaps further nerfs to the agent. And a large reason for this, of course, is to do with Killjoy's very high pick rate. This was at lock-in where they were using the old Killjoy, but you can see 70% pick rate. Absolutely astronomical pick rate, and pretty much on 6 of the 7 maps above 50% as well. Absolutely insane number for Killjoy to have. But as I mentioned, that was with the old Killjoy, but even if we come to the NA Challengers League in the more recent weeks where they were using the new Killjoy, you can still see a very high pick rate for Killjoy overall, right? We're still seeing a lot of Killjoy across most of the maps as well. So yeah, Killjoy is still in a very good position even after those earlier nerfs. And so let's talk about the nerfs and what those nerfs actually could be. Because if we go through Killjoy's kit now, it kind of is becoming more and more increasingly difficult, I think, to find nerfs that make sense. For instance, they just nerfed the turret down in HP, so I would highly doubt they're going to touch the turret again. That would feel like a very odd change if they did, so I don't think they're going to nerf the turret. The alarm bot, I don't even honestly know how you would really nerf the alarm bot, to be honest. Maybe, like, change the amount of time you get vulnerable if you get hit by it, which would be such a small change anyway. It wouldn't even make that much of a difference, I don't think. So yeah, I don't even know how they would really nerf the alarm bot without just changing the ability. And then the nanoswarms, I mean, again, maybe you could look at like cost. I guess you could assume that for the alarm bot as well. Maybe the cost goes up, maybe they reduce the damage slightly of the nanoswarms, I guess. But again, would that really be enough? And then you've got the ult, and really the only big change that I can think that makes sense for Killjoy is to revert the ult back to its old HP, where it can be destroyed by things like a breach aftershock. Now, I initially thought that they changed the ult so that it couldn't be destroyed by things like that, because it kind of makes sense, just as kind of like a playing the game. You want your ult to feel like it has a big impact, and when you Killjoy ult and it gets destroyed by a breach aftershock, it's just kind of a bit of a feels bad, right? Like, you know, my ult that I've been working for, and now would even have to work harder for, because now it's an 8 cost ult, got destroyed by this, you know, one tiny bit of utility. At least now it has to be destroyed by either multiple bits of utility or another ult at least, right? You know, that's kind of part of the game now, but yeah, I don't know if they would want to do that because it is a bit of feels bad, but at least that would be, I guess, a significant nerf if they did reduce the ult HP back to a level where it could be destroyed more readily by more utility. But then we come to perhaps the bigger question, which is this nerf warranted if it does come, whether it's big or small? Because I know that a lot of you are probably thinking, yeah, Killjoy's pick rate is high, but she's not like old Chamber, or she's not like old Jet or old Astro, you know, this like really, really super mega OP agent that you just can't play around and it's going to get picked in every game. I don't think many people feel like that for Killjoy, right? No one, I think, is kind of saying that overall. So is another nerf actually warranted? Because there could be other things that are inflating Killjoy's pick rate. For instance, if the rest of her class was particularly weak, which some of you might say, yeah, the rest of her class is particularly weak, and therefore that is inflating Killjoy's pick rate, you know, that might be one of the causes. And, you know, Killjoy herself maybe isn't the problem. Another thing might be the map pool, right? That right now, the 2 maps that aren't in the map pool are Bind and Breeze, which are arguably 2 of Killjoy's worst maps. And if Bind and Breeze were in the pool, those might be maps where, I mean, definitely Breeze, Killjoy would see literally 0% pick rate, and you would definitely have other Sentinels fill that role instead. You know, and so is that inflating Killjoy's pick rate? Because if you got rid of Icebox and Ascent, you know, there would be less Killjoy, right? Instead of Bind and Breeze. So, you know, maybe the map pool is also inflating Killjoy's number a bit, and maybe it's not that big of a problem. But let's go back to the class problems, because yeah, the map pool stuff, there's probably no quick fix for that until they change the maps again. But when we're talking about the class problems, of course, there are things that they can do outside of nerfing Killjoy that can address the class balance as a whole. Now for this, I'm mainly talking about Killjoy, Cypher, and Chamber, and not necessarily Sage, because Sage kind of doesn't fit into the normal kind of Sentinel role. She's kind of off just doing her own thing, kind of a bit different to the others. Like, you know, you might play Sage and still play one of the others very commonly because of how the agents work. But when we focus on the other three, there is one kind of clear thing that I think is true about those three Sentinels, is that on most maps, not necessarily all, but on most maps, you're probably going to play one, and exactly one of those agents. Playing two might be a bit redundant, and playing zero might be a bit risky depending on the map and the rest of your comp, but playing one is going to be the standard across most maps in most scenarios. And the problem with that is that if you've got one agent that is just okay, and then two bad agents, then you end up with the okay agent looking like really strong, because you're going to pick one of them, and you're just going to pick the one that's okay. Everyone's just going to pick the one that's okay instead of the two that are bad. And I think that, people might argue that that is what we've got going on right now, in that we've got one okay agent, and you are going to pick one of these three, so you're just going to pick the one that's okay. And of course, that would directly lead you to the idea that instead of nerfing Killjoy, you want to buff the other Sentinels and make them okay as well, right? And you end up with 3 okay options. Instead, that would be the best way of dealing with this, and therefore you want to buff Cypher and Chamber, which I think would be an incredibly popular decision with most players. Okay, the Chamber one might be a bit up and down, but definitely buffing Cypher, I think most people would be completely on board with buffing Cypher in some kind of way. And this is not to say that they won't do that. I actually think that that's probably the most likely outcome overall. If they are going to nerf Killjoy again, I almost would expect that they might buff the other Sentinels as well, because as I said, I think it would be an extremely popular decision that would probably make sense in terms of pick rates and win rates as well. And we have seen this kind of thing before. Valorant patch notes 4.04 did pretty much this exact thing, but with the controller class, where at the time we had 2 very strong controllers in Astra and Viper, and 2 very weak controllers in Brimstone and Omen, and the devs just decided, okay, this patch is going to just be dedicated to basically fixing the controller class. We're going to nerf Astra and Viper pretty heavily, right? I mean, look at all of these changes here. You see how many little notes there are. And then for Brim and Omen, we're going to increase them, right? We increase Omen and Brim and buff them up a bit. And so we ended up in a controller class that was much healthier than it was before, where the one before was dominated by Astra and Viper, and Brim and Omen never saw any play pretty much. But we ended up in a situation where, it was much more balanced. And for the most part, these 4 agents have kind of stayed pretty much where they were since, and we've ended up in a pretty balanced overall controller class, and so it shows that it is possible for the Sentinels as well. And so this is the kind of thing that I would be expecting if we get another Killjoy nerf. I would expect that the Killjoy changes themselves, I hope, aren't that big, but then we also get Cypher and Chamber buffs, which makes us in a place where we end up with a pretty balanced Sentinel class overall, and you end up with a situation where all 3 of the Sentinels are, somewhat viable on different maps, and we end up in a much better space. But let me know what you think in the comments down below. How would you go about addressing the Sentinel class? How would you go about nerfing Killjoy or buffing Cypher and Chamber to end up with a class that was much more balanced?